Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we're tackling something that affects virtually every leader, and it's giving feedback without hurting people's feelings. Now, if you've ever found yourself holding back from having a difficult conversation because you didn't want to upset someone, or if you've watched a team member struggle whilst knowing exactly what they need to hear but not quite knowing how to say it, then this episode is definitely for you. So we're going to be exploring this through the lens of what's called ruinous empathy. And it's a concept that comes from Kim Scott's radical candor framework. And don't worry if you haven't heard of radical candor before, because we're going to get Jackie to give us a brilliant overview the whole framework first, and then we'll dive deep into this particular challenge that so many of our coaching clients bring to us. So the reason we wanted to dedicate a whole episode to this is because whilst caring about your people is absolutely essential as a leader, sometimes that care can actually hold you back from giving them the feedback that they need to grow and succeed. So let's unpack this together and give you some practical tools to overcome it. So, Jackie, give us an overview of radical candor, just in case people haven't listened to the previous episode.
So, radical candor is a framework from Kim Scott, and it is all around feedback. So, the idea with radical candor is that there are two dimensions, which is care personally and challenge directly. And the idea is that radical candor is the top quadrant. So it's when you both care personally for somebody and you challenge them directly. And what she talks about within the framework is that the most common mistake that leaders make is that you care personally, but that it feels uncomfortable to also challenge directly. And in that quadrant, that's ruinous empathy. We recognize when I share this with clients, when we talk about it on leadership development days, people so often identify that, yeah, maybe I dodge an awkward conversation, or I don't know how to say something, so I don't say it at all. Ruinous empathy is definitely something that we know a lot of leaders identify. That's where they struggle perhaps with feedback. So that was why we felt this was worth a bit of a deep dive, building on the previous episode.
Amazing. That was a perfect overview. So let's get into ruinous empathy then, as it's in its own little quadrant. Let's unpack it, because I think that this is probably one of the most important parts of it, because if you get this element wrong, it can have some real detrimental effects on how you provide feedback, how you lead. And I suppose it's that trust that you're building within your team. And I suppose an example of it is going to be when you've held back from providing tough feedback because maybe you didn't want to hurt someone's feelings, and then you've watched them continue to struggle or eventually maybe face harsher consequences. And then you know that you could have had that conversation with them earlier. You could have supported them. You could have put something in place to help them. So let's break down ruinous empathy, because as a term, I don't know, does it sound a little bit scary? What actually is ruinous empathy?
So I think where the terminology, and I'm probably putting words in Kim Scott's mouth because she developed the framework, so she'll be able to explain it. But my interpretation is that when you have empathy and you care for the people that you are working with, so this could be people that are in your team, people that are colleagues, peers, it's not necessarily just people that you line manage, but when you have empathy and understanding for their motivators, their drivers, why they operate in the way they do, then you can sometimes be more forgiving of that. You might understand that somebody's having a tough time outside of work. And so, if they're a bit sharp or a bit short at work, you're going to have that empathy for that contributing to that situation. So I think it's that element of where your degree of empathy and understanding of somebody causes you to hold back from sharing things that could contribute to that person's growth in some way. And that's really the kind of nuts and bolts of it, is that this ruinous empathy doesn't mean that you're going to have to start feeding back on absolutely everything and being critical of people. It's about understanding, in my behavior, in the way that I operate as a leader, am I hesitating to share with people things that could contribute to their growth because I am not in that place where I feel able to provide that degree of challenge? And that can be often about, I think they're a decent person, I like them, I get on well with them, I don't want to risk the relationship. There's so many different reasons why it comes about. But I think that's really that discomfort with delivering it is what results when you have that empathy for that individual.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense. And just as you're talking through that, I'm just thinking at the start of my leadership career, there's so many times where I just avoided giving that feedback or having those conversations because I was like, oh, I know that person has got a lot of stuff going on at home. I know there's different things going on for that person. I avoided having those conversations because I didn't want to add to the pressure. But actually, in some of those cases, the pressure increased because they needed to have that support. They needed to know what changes they needed to make. So I feel like that's almost like the perfect definition of it. And I suppose the next question is, why do so many of us fall into the ruinous empathy trap? I know, thinking about it, I'm thinking back going, I can see why I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. But I suppose, what other situations could there be, and how can people avoid falling into that trap?
I think there's so many different factors that can happen with this. So one is that sense of cultural conditioning, and that can be geographic, depending upon where you are. Most of our listeners are in the UK, and being polite and being nice is seen as a positive thing. So if you feel like if you're too challenging, you're not going to be perceived that way, then it's hard to do. You don't want to damage the relationship. You don't want that person to not be prepared to engage with you in a professional relationship after, and you maybe don't know or don't have the skill as to how to deliver it without feeling like you might risk the relationship. You might be anticipating that they might be upset or emotional about the hearing what you've got to share, and you either don't know how to handle that emotional reaction or don't want to be the one that causes it. And I think a lot of it is also like organizational cultures. There's lots of organizational cultures where it's, we want to be a friendly culture, we want to be an open culture, we want people to enjoy working here. And this is what I often see, is that in teams or organizations where that's the case, there's often that sense of it's relatively surface level. It's a thing of, oh, everyone cares about each other. It's, yeah, you can care about people and also set the bar high and also offer a challenge and also stretch people and look for growth. So I think it's often where that kind of comfort factor falls ahead, but there's an absolute myriad of reasons why that can come about.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, just listening to you talk through that, people do care about their teams and people want to be seen to care about the teams. And in some ways, providing that feedback and having those tough conversations can almost show that you care more because you're really helping them people to develop in their roles, within their career, just within life generally. So I suppose that the next thing is, what happens when we practice ruinous empathy within our teams generally?
So I think this is the thing. It might, in the short term, feel like, oh, it's a nice place to be. But actually, there's often kind of tensions that perhaps can build under the surface. Maybe people aren't held to account as much for delivery, and that can cause frustrations when the pressure is on. It can be about where, someone who's a high performer gets demotivated, because what's the point in me busting a gut if the people alongside me are not having that bar set as high? And then I think also it's that thing of, to your point, of when you're not giving people feedback that contributes to their growth, then that can have consequences for them. So if somebody goes for a promotion or another role and is told no, actually, if the stuff that you could have addressed, you could have made them aware of or pushed them to make a change in that sooner, then it's, why didn't you tell me? If that's why I'm not ready, why didn't I already know that? So I think, yeah, there's lots and lots of unintended consequences that come about as a result of not being prepared to just challenge a little bit more.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, as you're going through those situations and having those experiences, it's probably worth asking yourself, what would I really like to say to this person? If I didn't have any worries about how it'd make them feel, if almost thinking blue sky about it, what would I want to say or what would I want to communicate to this person? And then looking at actually what you would like to say and what you are going to say or what you have said, and looking at the differences there, because I think that also helps from a personal development point of view for yourself, because then you can go, what was stopping me from giving them the feedback that I really wanted to share? And sometimes that could just be yourself, that you don't know how to articulate that message, or maybe you're worried about the fallout from that message. I think there's loads of different things that could play into it, but I always think the first thing is that self-awareness and asking yourself, like, why, or what's the difference between the message I'd really like to share and the message that I have shared. When we were talking through this, we said there's probably four key skills, isn't there, that people can develop to get better at this, and I suppose overcome being in this situation. So the first one, which was around building a foundation of genuine care. So I suppose the first question around that is, how do you demonstrate that your feedback comes from a place of care and not criticism? I think that's a really tough one, isn't it?
So I think for me, there's a couple of things about the radical candor framework that sometimes get missed. So one is that a fundamental principle of feedback is get it before you give it. And when you are someone who asks for feedback, who seeks feedback, who acts on feedback, then people are going to be much more open to receiving your feedback. So I think sometimes when you recognize that you've been guilty of practicing ruinous empathy, it's about considering, okay, where can I get feedback from people? Where can I ask for feedback so that I can show that taking feedback on board and changing is part of the normal cycle of how we develop professionally. But also within the framework, Kim also emphasizes the importance of giving positive, specific feedback. So radical candor as a framework, people often think about using that in the times where they've got a difficult message, but actually using it and getting into the practice of using it when you've got positive stuff to talk about, where it's saying, I want to see more of this from you. I thought you did this really well in that session, and I would like to see you stretch yourself by doing more of this next time. That is a positive stretch as opposed to giving constructive feedback. So what you're looking for is to really look to ensure that there is some balance, and that you're not just trying to step away from ruinous empathy when you've got a tough message, but also that your positive feedback is specific, is stretching, is focused on growth, is focused on the future, and that it's delivered really regularly. Because in that context where feedback, and we've talked about feedback so many times on the podcast, but where it's all levels in all directions, where you're asking for it yourself and you're delivering lots of positive feedback, then that's when that foundation of genuine care is going to be in place.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I suppose building that foundation of genuine care, which is probably the top skill to develop, isn't it? Then fits, the other ones fit quite nicely into that. So asking for the feedback before you give it, which is a good one, isn't it? Because not many people do that. They won't ask for feedback because I think sometimes as a manager, you don't want to hear about it when you're trying to do your job, when you're trying to move forward. Getting feedback can be really difficult to deal with, especially if you've got some insecurities or you've got a little bit of imposter syndrome hanging around. Asking for feedback can be one of those situations that could really knock your confidence. But all of this is about taking the emotion out of it, isn't it? And just like looking at, okay, what is the process? How am I going to build that foundation of genuine care? And it is just about taking the emotion out and starting to build those relationships and making people feel safe as well, isn't it? And then the third thing was around delivering direct feedback effectively. So if this is something that you struggle with, then again, it's something that you can drill into, isn't it, for your own personal development? Like, how do you feel about providing that feedback? And if you always feel uncomfortable, then that's definitely something that you can work on from a personal perspective as well. And the more you do of it, the easier it gets, as with anything. And then you've got the fourth thing, which is around managing your own emotions as well. And you might have a different take on it, but I always feel like in these situations, I always like to take the emotion out of it, because a lot of these situations, especially where feedback is concerned, can be quite emotionally charged. And I always think, okay, let's look at it from a business perspective. Let's take the emotion out of it. And what does it look like with no emotion? And then you can think about the emotions later on, but take that emotion out, strip it out completely. And how do we handle the discomfort? How do we have the conversations?
It's really interesting because I think subtly different, but along the same lines. So rather than take the emotion out of it, my approach was always to ask myself the question of, what is my responsibility here as a leader? So not what feels comfortable for me, what feels okay for me to do, but what is my responsibility as a leader in this situation? And I remember years ago having a conversation. So my boss came on a visit with myself and one of my team, and we were having this three-way conversation. And after my team member had gone away, my boss was like, "You were really challenging." And to me, I didn't operate differently when my boss was there. I was challenging of my team and I expected high standards and I did set the bar high. And for me, it was really natural that came out in that conversation. So it wasn't something that I was consciously doing, but that I think always stemmed from that mindset that I had of, this is what this role requires of me. I'm supposed to deliver the best possible results. I'm supposed to ensure that people don't stay static, that they continue to be challenged to deliver at their best and to be responsible for delivering whatever objectives or KPIs have been set out. So I think for me, it's along a similar line, but from perhaps a slightly different space in terms of, almost then it becomes inevitable. For me, it became inevitable. You have to have the conversation because that's my responsibility as a leader. It's literally what I'm being paid for.
Yeah, and I also like that way of looking at it. And I suppose it's, if you're in this situation, it's just about thinking like what works for you, and whatever way works best for you, then, that's the way you should start to tackle these things, because a lot of this stuff doesn't feel comfortable. And I always think when you're in that space of it feeling uncomfortable and you're thinking, this is where out my comfort zone, that is where the growth really happens. And the radical candor framework, generally, it's, if all businesses operated in that way, wow, imagine what could be achieved. And there wouldn't be any of these toxic workplace cultures and all of this kind of stuff. And it would probably transform how most organizations work. And I suppose as a leader, understanding the radical candor framework, you can be that change. And I suppose in some ways that sounds quite cheesy, but you can affect your department. Like, as a senior leader, you can implement this framework, you can start using it, you can start being consistent with it, and your people will learn from you, you'll be a role model for them. And I do think, like in any senior leadership role that I've ever been in, I make sure that I become that change that I want to see, even if it feels difficult, even if it feels uncomfortable. And there's times when I think, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? But I always think that when you feel uncomfortable, that is where the growth is happening. And you come out the other side and you're just like, wow, okay, like, how can we make this even better?
And I think with this, if you recognize that, yeah, okay, I have had those nice relationships, I haven't been as challenging of some of my team as I could have been. Either I haven't delivered difficult messages, or maybe I haven't stretched them and provided that next level of, because I really do feel like that's a lot of it with ruinous empathy as well, is that even people who are prepared to have conversations that need to be had sometimes don't feel comfortable stretching and setting the bar high and saying, I can see the potential in you. This is where I want you to get to. And when I'm delivering these messages, it's because I know that you can get there. And that's a really positive message. And I think often people don't set that stretch for other people, but actually it can be, when people are ready for it and hungry for it, that can be incredibly motivating to feel like, wow, my boss really believes that I have the potential to get there, and they're prepared to support me and give me that challenge and that stretch along the way. So I feel like, yeah, we're probably both pretty evangelical about radical candor as a framework if it's adopted well. But I think, as with anything where it's simple, that's why I like it, because it's simple. But I do feel like it often gets a bit of that misinterpretation around that ruinous empathy is just about the difficult conversations, or radical candor is just about critical feedback. So I think it's really being willing to explore what aspects of ruinous empathy might I display and what that might be costing, and then being prepared to be the one to make a change.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. What are our key takeaways then from this session?
So I think if you are recognizing that you perhaps have been guilty of being in that ruinous empathy quadrant, then I think essentially it's those 4 steps. So build a foundation of genuine care through regular positive feedback and recognition. It's create a two-way culture by asking for feedback before you give it. And it's delivering direct feedback with clarity, with compassion, on a regular basis, and being willing to manage your own discomfort so that you can do those other 3 steps.
Amazing. So if you've been listening to this episode and you recognize yourself within any of these elements that we've talked through, and you want to develop more confidence and give a meaningful feedback, coaching can help. And we can work together on communication techniques, practical strategies, and things that you can do to help you care personally while challenging directly. So drop us a message and we'll be able to share all of the coaching options available. And as ever, we hope that you've enjoyed this week's episode. Please do share it with anyone that you also think might find it useful. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favourite podcast platforms. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.